Okay, folks, we're going to get started. Thank you for coming out. It's great to see so many people show up for this. My name is Crash. I'm with the Radical Anti-Capitalist Caucus of Occupy Portland. We have sponsored this along with our allies, the St. Francis Church. And the St. Francis has very kindly offered this space to us for this event. Nevertheless, I'm going to pass around this very hat, as you see, just to try to collect a little token amount as a gesture of appreciation to the St. Francis administration. Valerie is here. I think she was here a minute ago. Valerie. And we'll hand whatever we can collect. So if you have an extra dollar, if you don't, that's okay. It's a free event. But just to appreciate the St. Francis space. Meanwhile, I want to introduce very quickly Brian Willson. He's one of my heroes. That's why we have invited him here to speak. And you don't want to hear about me because it's not all about me, right? But I just want to tell you that it's my birthday today. And 39. Yeah, 39 times something. I was born in 1959, May 9th. And this is my celebration. I haven't planned anything else except this. This is a great birthday gift for me. There's another personal connection that I have. And I'm not going to say a whole lot because Brian will talk a lot about himself and his experience. But I'll say a couple of things. The other personal connection I have today is that in September of 1987, after Brian lost his legs, as you know, trying to block a munitions train that was bringing weapons to El Salvador. I went to a protest. It was a big event. Jesse Jackson flew in a helicopter, spoke, and then flew back out. I think Joan Baez sang. And after the event, we were kind of angry. We thought, so that's it? Now we just go home? And some angry young man, I used to be young, tore up the train tracks. And there's a photograph of that here in Brian's book, Blood on the Tracks. There's a photograph of that little personal connection. I can't find myself in there, but I'm in there somewhere tearing up the train tracks. And I just wanted to mention that because it's an example of direct action. It was the first time that I ever engaged in that. I didn't initiate it. I just came upon it. It was happening, and I thought, yeah, I'm angry enough to do this. And then I walked away feeling scot-free. No one was arrested. No one was hurt. I was surprisingly easy to tear up train tracks. I thought it would be difficult, but it was quite easy. And then that was it. I didn't think I would ever actually get to meet Brian Willson. Yeah. I didn't even know where you were until someone told me, hey, he's bicycling around town with the hand cycle. Wow. And I went, oh yeah, I remember that guy. A lot of people remember that guy. People remember him for doing hunger strikes in Washington, D.C. on the steps of the Capitol. People remember him for going to Nicaragua and Witness for Peace. And it's sort of an awesome, endless list of things. When you're reading his book, it's just impossible to summarize. But he's been everywhere, and he's been active his entire life, and it's been quite a journey. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brian. But I think I want to say one last thing about Brian Willson, and that is he's partly here because of that incident that I just mentioned, the train thing. But that's not really my ultimate aim for inviting him. And I've been thinking about this. It's not that Brian really wanted to get hit by a train. I'm very sure that he did not want to get hit by a train. Is it? You know what I'm talking about? This is not about being a martyr. This is not about I'm more radical than you because I can go out there and take the most punishment. We don't need more martyrs. We don't need people to get hurt. What we need is to make a better society. And that's why he was out there. And if you read his book, it's like at every step of his journey, it's been about choosing life itself. He's gone into ecology and a biocentric worldview. And that's of a piece. It's the same journey as choosing to be in front of that train. And I looked more closely at that series of photographs and I realized he was trying to get off of the tracks. He was trying to live. He wasn't trying to become a martyr. It's not as if he had a death wish or something. So that's not what it's about. What it's about is he was trying to make a better society. He was trying to improve everyone's life. And he's still trying that today. So let's hear what he has to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to members of the Portland Occupy and general community. I'm thrilled, actually, to be invited by Occupy. I'm honored. You don't know this, but on October 7th, which was the second day of the camp in Portland, I visited the camp on my hand cycle. I was actually on my way out of town on a book tour to the East Coast the next morning. And I simply cycled down to kind of see what the camp looked like. And then on my book tour, I visited 11 other occupied camps, mostly in the East. And it was very educational and inspiring to me to be with these different camps from Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, Rochester, Ithaca, Albany, Boston, Portland, Maine, Manchester, New Hampshire, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, both camps in Washington, McPherson Square, Freedom Plaza, and then down to Atlanta. And so some of us, and I know there's 2 Vietnam vets over here, and there might be more in the room that I don't know. We got radicalized from our war experiences in Vietnam, and we've been waiting for 40 years for an uprising. We have been involved in various ways in actions and, of course, in expressions of our conscience, witnessing to what we saw, what we learned, how we went through transformations after transformations in order to recover our humanity. And we're still recovering our humanity. But it sure is inspiring to know that there are a lot of people all over the country and all over the world who understand finally just how incredibly pathological and dysfunctional this culture is. And that if we continue business as usual, we're just basically choosing to commit suicide. I mean, industrial civilization is on a collision course with life itself. So I don't know where this energy is going to go. Probably nobody completely knows where it's going, how it's going to be morphing. But I think it's a kind of an energy that grew out of the Arab Spring, maybe, that was long overdue, but it was waiting to happen at some point. It was waiting to happen. It was a ripeness. When it's ripe, things happen. You don't even organize them, they happen. And I think it's worth remembering that there was a trigger at this point in history when this Tunisian PhD couldn't get a teaching job and got a vendor cart. He was trying to survive in Tunisia, and apparently didn't have whatever the government said was the proper, whatever he had to have to get that vendor, to have that vendor cart, the right permit. And they destroyed that cart and beat him up. And then later he immolated himself. Some of you may remember that. And every Tunisian outside the small 1% at the top could relate to that man. He was expressing his just exasperation and frustration and trying to share his anguish with the world. And when people decide to go to the street in mass, power cannot survive. Power requires consent. Power, vertical power, requires cooperation in the masses in various ways, even silence. even if you're reluctant about or are disgusted with policies, if they're not, if that disgust isn't expressed publicly in the street in some way, that power continues. So that's why I think Occupy is the beginning. And actually, if we don't have this continuation of this beginning, it's going to be pretty difficult to stop this madness. So I think of you all as being part of an incredible revolution of consciousness that's still trying to figure out how to do it. I feel like I could be, I could listen to all of you and actually learn a lot more than just me talking to you. So I mean, I know I'm an elder now, I'm almost 71, and I never dreamed I would make it this far after I left Vietnam in 1969, just totally devastated by what I had experienced. I'm hoping that there will be a melding or a synthesis of the elders with the youth, that some of us who have been on the front lines for 40 years now can perhaps share some of our ideas and thoughts with the people that have this energy now and this realizing you don't have any choice. You don't have a reasonable choice other than rising up, because the system is going to crush you if you cooperate with it, or even if you're silent. So again, I thank you for inviting me, and it's a thrill for me to be with people who are wanting to create a whole new paradigm, wanting to create a whole new epistemology, if you will, about what makes us tick. Just briefly about my story, which is in this book. By the way, it took me many years to write this memoir. I didn't think I'd ever get it finished. And then when I was ready with the manuscript, I was turned down by 33 publishers. So it was the 34th publisher that published in PM Press from Oakland. But this book describes, and it was my therapy, writing the book was very therapeutic for me. It describes my origins in a farming community in upstate New York in the 40s and 50s. It was the McCarthy era. You know, everybody was an anti-communist. That was just, there was no thought given to. We were just, communists were everywhere. They were in your closet. They were you know, they were at the post office. They were in school. They were in the playground. They were everywhere. Like today, terrorists, the boogeyman. And so I didn't question it. I was a jock. I was an all-conference athlete in a small town. I was a valedictorian in my class. I was on the Honor Society. I was on the Student Council. I was active in my church. I was head of my Baptist Youth Fellowship. You know, this is my very basic origins in what we call America, but really U.S. America. Remember, America goes from the North Pole to the South Pole, and there's many countries that make up America. We're just U.S. America. So that shaped my values, it shaped my thought patterns, shaped basically the choices I was going to be making, and I actually did want to be an FBI agent. And I was shocked when I got the rejection letter from J. Edgar Hoover saying I wasn't accepted as a junior agent because I thought I was the perfect, loyal, patriotic young man to infiltrate the Communist Party and find out what their plans were in my community. So that's how, you could say, naive and dumbed down I was, but I was fairly typical in those days. It wasn't, I didn't know beatnik poets or people who were asking questions or in an intellectual dialogue. I had no exposure to that whatsoever. In fact, I was just very content to be in America. the greatest country in the history of the world, endowed by God to bring Christianity to the heathen and prosperity to the impoverished. I mean, it was a great story. I really didn't. I didn't have any reason to want to question that story. It was just very wonderful. I felt good, you know. Well, that all started changing when I was in graduate school. This was in the 60s, and the draft was on. I wish we had a draft again, actually, so that we would have a far greater resistance. We would have a lot of resistance, a lot more resistance if people knew across the board that their son or daughter was going to be grabbed by the state, sent to basic training to learn to kill, and then go into other countries and kill people and be killed. That is a pretty heavy thing to be facing at 18 when everybody has to face it, not just the people that have no options. So, I know people can debate that, but my feeling is that we need the state to be plucking us out, and then we say, you're not taking us, we're just going to sit down, you can do whatever you want, take us to jail or whatever, we're not cooperating. So I didn't have that philosophy at that time. And it turns out I was drafted in 1966, and I didn't think I could be drafted because I had a deferment, but I fell through a loophole, which I didn't even know existed. And so I enlisted in the military, in the Air Force for 4 years, thinking I was going to get it easier. And so I did have it easy for the first 2 years. I was at Headquarters Air Force at a plush white-collar job as a first lieutenant. But then I got my orders to go to Air Force Ranger training. I didn't even know the Air Force had Rangers. I didn't want to be a Ranger. If I'd wanted to be a Ranger, I would have gone in the Army. So at any rate, I went through the training, had a little problem in the training, but wound up going to Vietnam with 40 men under my command, and in charge of security of an air base in the Mekong Delta, almost 100 miles south of Saigon, today's Ho Chi Minh City. And while I was there, and within 5 weeks, my life completely changed. I had a series of experiences that just completely blew my mind out of my skull. I witnessed, in 1 week in April of '69, I witnessed 5 villages being wiped out by napalm bombing. Napalm is kind of a jellied gasoline. It burns everything in its wake. It asphyxiates anybody that survived the burning because it sucks the oxygen out of the air. And it burns the victims. And virtually nobody survives if you're in the village when the napalm bombs hit. So I happened to be involved in an extra duty. I didn't even know I was going to be doing this, but my duty was to document the success or failure of bombing missions, meaning did they hit their targets. And quite frankly, I was so naive when I started that week of documenting. I didn't even think of what a military target was. But in Vietnam, there were no military targets. There were just people targets. That's what the targets were. And so in this case, they were all villages, 5 villages that I happened to be asked to document. And in that week, somewhere between 700 and 900 villagers, way more than half being children, were burned to death. And I was shocked. I thought this must be a terrible mistake, or this must be, of course I described all this in the book at the very beginning of the book, because my life really took a big turn after this, and more interesting parts happened later. But of course I turned against the war, and which simply meant I spoke out against the war every day to my superiors, which was not cool, but I still had my job of protecting the air base. I positioned my machine gunners every night, critical positions. I carried 15 or 20 flares on my uniform every night, and when we heard a noise off the perimeter, I just would slap my parachute flare, we'd go up in the air, and it would light up this whole area of around the perimeter. Who's out there? So I still was doing that, but I no longer, I knew that this was, actually the word I think I used at some point was, this is demonic. This is beyond, this is beyond the pale. And so this was my very first stages of being awakened, of being a questioner, of being somebody that knew. When I was in those villages, I knew that I was on the wrong side, if there are sides. And I had remembered studying the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson. And there's a passage in the Declaration of Independence that talks about the merciless Indian savages that were destroying the European colonialists in the colonies. And I remember thinking, I'm the savage. We got it all backwards. It's the other way around. And so that was a very interesting process I was going through. No longer the white man savior, but in fact the white man demon. And about a week after I was in those villages, I remember reading an article in the Stars and Stripes, which is a military newspaper, about a young guy in the States who was arrested for burning the flag, and he was in jail. And I remember thinking, you know, I witnessed 5 villages being burned to death by pilots who were dropping napalm bombs, and they all got promotions. And that was kind of that kind of just was just the final grasp of reality that you can burn the symbol for the policy of burning people, and you go to jail. But if you burn the people, you get promoted. So that was what, you know, just all that was going through me. And so by the time I got out of Vietnam, and I escaped the court-martial, I escaped court-martial charges, but without a court-martial. And then I got out of the military. I finished law school, and then I was jolted again. I passed the bar in D.C., Washington, D.C. My first case as a defense lawyer, I was sitting up at the table as a rookie, very new lawyer. And the bailiff comes in and says, everybody rise. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. And I couldn't rise. There was something about that authority figure that all of a sudden was so viscerally offensive to me that I would automatically respect an authority figure in a black robe. I didn't know that was going to happen until it happened. And it happened 3 times in about a week and a half. I kept thinking, I will overcome this. I will certainly be able to adapt to the rules of the court, the protocol. And after 3 times, I realized, you know, I'm really screwed up. I just can't adapt to this. This is not comfortable for me. This is not right. And, but I wasn't proud of it. I didn't think of it as a great thing. I just thought of it as it was just a strong feeling inside me that I had to honor it. And so that was the beginning of my understanding of obedience versus disobedience. My understanding of when to be obedient and when to be disobedient, you know, actually becomes strategic. So I left the law, and went on through the whole decade of the 70s and early 80s working on justice issues in the country. I mean, I was a criminologist also. I have an academic degree, advanced degree in criminology. And of course, I realized by the time I couldn't practice law that the whole system was totally corrupt and criminal. And that it had always been that way. So one thing that Vietnam led me to do, which was a wonderful thing, and that was I became a student of history, which I'm still a student of history. I wanted to know the context of everything, that as much as I could, about everything that happened. How do I fit in this long view of history? And then I discovered, wow, the Constitution itself was a document that promoted commercial enterprises and private property over human liberty. But that was part of the myth of this great document, the Constitution. And then I studied the history of the Founding Fathers. And that was another wonderful revelation of who these Founding Fathers were. How much property they were protecting, and how much, including their slaves. And so I started demythologizing history. All the history that I had learned, I realized was probably not true. But I wanted to know history. I wanted to know more about the history of how people have responded to tyranny and repression, going way back, and how repression works and how tyranny works. And so I spent really years in the 70s studying this history, which just gave me more, emboldened me to be more clear about why I'm on the path I'm on, and the path being promoting justice and fairness rather than a class and you know, injustice. You cannot have class in a society without having endemic injustice. It's just the way it is, and that's one of the great contributions of Occupy, is it's opened up the conversation nationally and internationally about class, how all these power structures, all these nation states operate on vertical power. I call it vertical power, power complexes, and they only can function with the consent of the masses. If the masses withdraw their consent, power collapses almost instantly, as it did in Tunisia in a week. But it's a mind shift. It's a thought structure shift that you can actually look to your neighbors and say, you know, we're participating in something that's killing us and hurting us. Why are we doing this? And all through human history, human beings have been able to adjust, and I'm hoping even still, to when they actually find that the systems that they created themselves are no longer working. They no longer participate in perpetuating that system. They actually start gathering in assemblies and in meetings and discussing, what are we going to do now? We have to kind of start over. We have to kind of talk with each other in the street without a living room wall between us and without a television distracting us. We actually are going to converse with one another about what are we going to do. And so that's why I think this is an exciting moment. Just in time, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a prophet. At any rate, throughout my time in the 70s and 80s, I was getting what my father would say, you're becoming more and more marginal. Son, you're getting more and more marginal. And I said, well, maybe that's the price for being free in the society, because the society is not about freedom, it's about obedience to certain rules and regulations, which basically mean that the commercial enterprises and business and military-industrial complex can get their way, even if we don't like it, because we're still not disobedient enough. We're still too obedient or too passive, or we're paying our taxes, whatever it is. So by the 80s, the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was the president, some of you may have remembered Ronald Reagan, but some of you weren't born when Ronald Reagan was president. Some of us that endured Ronald Reagan, it was one of the most agonizing painful experiences of our life, listening to his rhetorical bullshit over and over and over and over again, and just wondering how many people are really believing it. My parents did. My parents had his picture on the mantle. I couldn't even go home and visit them. I couldn't see that picture. How could people believe this? You know, so that got me more agitated, and I started going to Central America to see for myself what Reagan was talking about, these communists that were only 2 days driving time from Harlingen, Texas. And I went to Harlingen, Texas, and I wanted to see what kind of barricades they had erected. And of course there were no barricades, but Reagan had said they're going to invade Harlingen, Texas. And I did want to go there just to say that I'd been there, and I didn't see any concerns in Harlingen, Texas. But so a lot of what I was doing in Central America was observing U.S. policy in El Salvador and Nicaragua especially. I was living and spending time in the villages. In El Salvador, I was meeting with the guerrillas up in the mountains. In Nicaragua, I was in the war zones in Jinotega and Matagalpa. By the way, a few of you might remember Ben Linder. People here remember Ben Linder? I was with Ben Linder exactly 3 weeks to the day before he was murdered. We were having ice cream at the Matagalpa ice cream shop on April 7th, 1987. He was murdered on April 28th. Assassinated by Reagan's Contra-terrorists for building a little hydroelectric plant so that the people in northern Nicaragua would have a light bulb in the school and a refrigerator for their medicines. And that was an act of terror to Reagan because he was perceiving the Sandinistas were terrorists, and anybody that supported the Sandinistas were terrorists. I mean, you know, it's just the absurdity of it all. And knowing, having been out of Vietnam, knowing, you know, by the way, in Vietnam, for 11 years, 2,000 Asians were murdered every day for 11 years, on average. Now, how do you wrap your head around that? It's beyond comprehension. But it's that behavior is what built industrial civilization. That's the behavior that maintains industrial civilization. It's just that usually for those of us in the United States, it's been outsourced out of our view. So we don't see it, we don't feel it, and we can continue business as usual. I think that finally that is coming to an end because the consequences are going to be felt very severely here at home. You can't compartmentalize toxic behavior like that, completely outsourcing. It's going to come back sooner or later. Like a boomerang, only it returns with vengeance. So some of us, you know, when 9/11 happened, we would talk, well, it's about time. There was some kind of consequence that had to come sooner or later for all this behavior that we have been imposing on other people, creating this incredible misery and suffering. It isn't like we wanted it to happen, but we were wondering why it hadn't happened before. Because we don't know what it feels like to be bombed. We don't know what it feels like to be suffering. So I saw so much suffering in Nicaragua and Salvador, I decided, since Congress continued to fund these policies, despite thousands of people in this country, really wonderful people, were organizing against those policies. It's called the Latin American Solidarity Movement. You still have an organization here in Portland, offshoot of that. Well, Congress kept funding these policies, so there were a few of us that were in the war zones in the spring of '87. We were 10 vets, actually. We had been observing and monitoring in the war zones. We decided that one of the things we would do when we returned was we wanted to find out where the weapons were coming from. And we found out they were coming from the Concord, California Naval Weapons Station that were going to El Salvador and Nicaragua. So Yeah, well, let's just go to that station and begin blocking the movement of the munitions, knowing we're going to go to prison. Probably get beat up, but certainly going to go to prison. But the trains always stopped. The train speed limit was 5 miles an hour. That's on 3 miles of track, protected by 350 armed Marines, 24 hours a day. And the protocol was the train stopped and people would be arrested and go to jail. And but we said, there were 3 of us. And by the way, a year earlier, four vets had fasted on the steps of the Capitol on a hunger strike for 47 days. This was in response to Reagan's murders in Central America. We actually were planning, it was an open-ended water-only fast. We took no calories whatsoever in that 47 days. It was only water. And our statement to the public was, we just want to see some uprisings. We want to see some expression of resistance to this incredible mass murder going on in Central America. But on the 46th day, the doctor told us one of our 4 was near death. And that sent us into a whole deep reflection, because originally we had thought all 4 of us might die. We were not particularly committed to living or dying. We were open. As strange as that may sound, we were open. We had seen so much death that was being done by our country that people didn't know about. When people would come and talk to us on the steps and say, please start eating, we don't want you to die, we would say, if you can feel that way about us, maybe you can feel that way about all the people you can't see that are dying right now in Nicaragua and El Salvador because of our country's policy. And this is on the front steps of the U.S. Capitol building. We're fasting. So these people inside this building are funding this. Can you feel as much for those campesinos who are being murdered every day in Nicaragua and Salvador as you can concerned about us? That was the question we kept asking. Because we're just their representatives. We're just representing what it's like to start to be in the process of dying because of policy. Well, and at the end of the 47th day, we had decided that we would come off the fast because it was the reality of one of our members who was near death. And actually we were in about 48 hours of discernment about what to do, because one of our members wanted to continue on until all 4 of us died and another one didn't, and I was kind of still in the middle. At any rate, that was in '86. Well, now a year later, after being in the war zones for a number of months, we're going to the Concord Naval Weapons Station. I and a bunch of people, including 2 other vets, one of whom was with me on the steps of the Capitol. We were going to do a 40-day fast on the steps, on the tracks at Concord Naval Weapons Station. There's a public right-of-way that bisects the base, so we were on the right-of-way property where the tracks cross the road. And we knew we were facing a year in prison because there was a sign next to our vigil that said, the penalty for blocking federal munitions trains is 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine. So we knew that. We were going to go to prison for a year. And the speed limit is 5 miles an hour, and there's 2 spotters that stand in front of the train in radio contact with the engineer, always saying whether the tracks are clear or not. Well, September 1st, '87, high noon was when the first train came. Sunny, very hot in Concord. I woke up 4 days later in the hospital. I have no memory of actually what happened. I do have some of the photos in the book. I actually had no idea what had happened. When I woke up, there were green plants at the base of my bed. And my partner and her son were sitting next to my bed. And I thought, wow, what a jail cell. I get to be I have plants, my family's here, and they explained to me that I wasn't in a jail cell, I was in a hospital room. A hospital room. Yeah, the train ran over you. What? Inconceivable. I even had 2 feet sticking up at the end of the bed that I didn't even know they weren't my real feet. They had already put a cast on my stumps with pylons going to these plastic feet because the doctors wanted me to practice walking to the bathroom in the room, in my own private room as soon as I was able to do that, just to keep the muscles from atrophying. But I had phantom pain. Phantom pain is pain in the parts of your body that are no longer there. I had phantom pain in my feet, so in my mind, I had painful feet. That's how and I had no memory, so it was pretty incredible. Well, this is what we found out. The 4 of us had fasted on the steps of the Capitol a year before. Why? We were classified as domestic terrorist suspects by the FBI. Imagine what? And the letters in here, and reprinted in the book. What? We found out that the train crew was ordered not to stop that day. Why? Because they said we were going to hijack the train. What? The train is on 3 miles of track. It just has 3 miles of track. And it's protected by 350 armed Marines. So, and there's a protocol. You know, they stop the train, police come, arrest us, take us to jail. So, but I didn't know about the terrorist connection until about the 18th day in the hospital. I was given a newspaper article from Peoria, Illinois, of all places. Headline, FBI agent fired. Local agent fired. I read the article. Oh, FBI agent Jack Bryan, 21.5 years in the FBI, fired for refusing to investigate 4 men on the steps of the Capitol's domestic terrorist suspects. Whoa. Imagine that. So, what happened to me is just what happens to people all over the world when you stand up to power. You're going to be smashed, or they're going to try to smash you. That's why we need a lot of solidarity. And I also became a Gandhian, so I know that's, I became a militant pacifist. I became committed to nonviolence, which I'm not advocating. I'm not saying people should be that way, but this is the way I am. I want to delegitimize the violence of the state. I want to delegitimize the state. And the only way for me to delegitimize the violence of the state is to delegitimize violence and not respond to violence with violence. That is a different philosophy, a different commitment, a different state of mind that I have developed because I don't want to continue perpetuating this historical model. This goes back 5,000 to 6,000 years. Violence in response to violence. We've had 14,500 wars since 3500 BC. The United States has militarily invaded 390 times since World War II. We've bombed 28 countries since World War II. We have committed 15 or 20,000 covert interventions since World War II. What do we think this is going to do to people? How do we, you know, it's like we have no concept of what I learned in Baptist Sunday school was the golden rule. You do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And every religion has that basic premise. It's kind of a no-brainer. You treat others as you want them to treat you. And so I've had to learn, and by the way, when we were in the war zones in Nicaragua as vets, we went through extensive nonviolent training so that we did not retaliate in kind. It's not the way we were trained. It's not the way we were conditioned. In other words, if we were confronted by the Contras, we would do whatever we felt we needed to do to save ourselves, but we were not going to have guns. And, but it was that training that was pretty powerful, realizing that, wow, and actually some of our members that were in that training dropped out because they knew they couldn't do that. And that's fair. That's because it's not for everybody. But out of all these experiences, I have really been committed to training myself as best I can to not respond with a scream or yell at somebody, including a cop. I like to sit down, actually, often when there's problems. I like to sit down and just kind of sit. But I do believe that, as Martin Luther King said, the issue is not between violence and nonviolence, it's between violence or non-existence. I mean, no, how does that go? If we don't learn nonviolence, we're not going to exist, but he has said it more poetically than I just said it. And I believe that. So, no, that's not the way I was trained or conditioned. I was trained to be a tough guy, basically. I mean, I wasn't even particularly tough. I didn't need to be. I was a white male. All those privileges and assumptions that come with that mean that you're on top, you're going to prevail, you're going to be a dominator. But you know what? A dominator is dehumanized too. And that's a hard one to learn, but once you realize that you're no longer really, you're being dehumanized in the process of looking down on other people, as much as you're dehumanized when you're at the bottom, constantly being bashed. So that's how I got interested in class, realizing that class is lethal in and of itself. The issue of class, and again, the Occupy people, like no other time that I'm aware of in history, in U.S. history, possibly this was true during parts of the labor movement when it was really very active. No other time have we really had this conversation about how lethal class is. So that is a real contribution of Occupy. It's changed the whole conversation. It's opened up this whole idea of just how incredibly sick the disparity is between the haves and the have-nots. Well, at any rate, I think I really would like to hear from you people. I mean, actually, I'm sure I could take a course from you, just in terms of your experiences of the last 6-7 months. There's a lot more that I've done after I lost my legs. I actually just kept on doing what I was doing. I kept going to other countries, documenting what the U.S. was doing, coming back, talking about it to people, trying to educate people about what the United States is doing. And you have to understand that 4.6% of the world's population is the United States, but we consume a third of the world's resources. That requires imperialism. That requires theft or armed theft or threat of armed theft all over the world to make sure people comply with our agenda. Our agenda is consumption. Consumption, consumption, consumption. We don't even question it. It's over the top. It's so incredibly insane, it's leading to the extinction of our species. I mean, how stupid is that? Really stupid to keep doing this. And by the way, I've spent 5 trips to visit with the Zapatistas in Chiapas after the revolution. So I've lived in the villages, I've stayed in the villages. We would say they're very poor. If you were to be in the village, you would say they were, from a typical standard, you'd say they're poor. They don't have hardly any clothes, they often don't have shoes. But every night, as you probably know, the revolution happened on January 1st, 1994. When the Zapatistas retook their land, one of the greatest occupations. They retook their lands that were taken from them earlier by the conquistadors. And they celebrate every night that they have asserted their dignity, saying they will never be slaves again, even if they are killed or they die young. They don't want to give up their dignity. So every night they have music and they dance. And you can tell they're really excited about that. They're celebrating. They are celebrating their dignity, and it's something to behold. And I'm looking forward to that happening in the United States, maybe something. We will celebrate our dignity as we radically downsize our lives, as we radically simplify our lives, and realize that it's people that are going to replace money. It's going to be our cooperation with one another that replaces our obsession with currency and materialism. And so that was another very important component of my evolution, in addition to also spending 2 trips to Cuba. And I give, in the last chapter, I go into a lot of philosophy about sustainability, ecology, and so forth, but I think I'll stop, and maybe you have questions and comments, or you can give me a lesson in occupying. Don't be shy. About something, why don't you,
Take sec.
yes.
So I saw, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so one, be first.
When I was listening to you recount what the U.S. has done in the places we've waged war and the governments we've messed up, all I can think of is 9/11 and people saying, why don't they like us? And the government line is, these people hated freedom.
Right.
It's just really glaring.
It's absurd. The whole thing is absurd. Actually, the whole society is absurd. It's a pretend society from the very beginning. But we are going to discover authenticity. That's our job. You got to be assertive and identify who you want to ask.
Hello, Mr. Wilson. I'm surprised at the level of philosophic sophistication of your address. I wasn't expecting such a line to be drawn between the dehumanizing of Vietnam War and the industrial system as a whole. Now, if I can, though, I'd like to ask you. You said it's okay to try to engage you
Yes,
intellectually.
Teach me.
You probably have a much more of an eidetic memory than I. I wouldn't, if I went to 11 Occupy sites, I wouldn't be able to rattle off all 11 of them. But now, about the industrial system we live under, let's look at it from this dialectical viewpoint of how can we learn from the opposite guys. So, for example, to give you an example of how you could learn from the opposite guys, if you were an atheist, you'd have to admit that the religious folks have a real good explanation for how come there's evil in the world. That is, the religious folks say they give you an opportunity to test yourself. And the atheists don't have that argument in their armamentarium. So that's what comes of being able to look at things from the opposite point of view. The economists or the capitalists, they are looking now, they hold up to us China. China used to be socialist. China used to be communitarian. China has a whole, I mean, for listening to Reagan's rhetoric was like Chinese listening to Mao and his little red book. And then they went whole hog capitalist, consumerist, and their per capita income has risen like a rocket.
With a lot more poverty, too.
Okay, so your response is that there's more poverty.
And so as you get more money going to the top, you get more poverty at the bottom.
I'm not so sure, is all I can say. But thank you very much for that response.
Okay, sorry. And there was the third person. Then I'll take another step.
Thanks for being here tonight. We all really appreciate it. Maybe it certainly wasn't the first time that many of us have experienced an unprecedented level of brutality from the police department. However, it seems to be a tipping point, at least, in my perception for people. And what the question that's keeping me up at night is how do we channel that very visceral rage into a positive, nonviolent response? Because it's very difficult when you're met with such a level of response to find that place where you can return, with it peacefully. So this seems to be your...
Well, it's a fantastic question. I don't have I don't have a neat answer as to how you process yourself and your group. I mean, I know there were, 39 people that were pretty severely beaten. I just to put it in context a little bit, as a criminologist, as an academically trained criminologist, I had to study the history of police behavior through our entire history as a country. And it's always been brutal. These are not aberrations. That doesn't help you, but just to keep the context. There are good police and good police departments at different times, but the pattern for the entire history that we've had professional or official units called police, and now modern police with trainings and so forth, the pattern has been very discouraging in terms of violence. And it's partly because they have a lot of power, and when people have power, they tend to abuse it. That is all the more reason why, in trying to delegitimize power, which is maintained by violence, to delegitimize violence, we have to be the opposite. Now, I'm 71. I didn't start out as a militant pacifist. I didn't know anything about philosophy, or I was a born-again Christian. Wow. I had to recover from that. And because in my church we were taught that you shouldn't kill, except in war. And then I discovered maybe killing is never okay. No exceptions. And that's not what I was taught. And so, for me, I started reading in the 70s prolifically about, I wanted to know how other people in the world thought about things. I read Gandhi, I read Tolstoy, I read Thoreau, I read Kropotkin, Peter Kropotkin, who is one of my main mentors, especially his book Mutual Aid. And I just realized, well, human consciousness is very real. I mean, I didn't even know about it. There is such a thing as a consciousness and a soul. And I should say that I should really describe what happened to me in one moment in Vietnam where I discovered my soul, which is probably the origins of my commitment to nonviolence. There was a moment in a village I couldn't walk any further because the bodies were so thick. And so I stopped because I couldn't walk anymore without tripping over bodies. And I looked at my feet, and there was the remains of looked like a young woman holding it looked like she had been holding 3 children as they fled the bombings. But her eyes were open. And I was just glued to her eyes. The eyelids had been burned off by napalm. And I was with a Vietnamese lieutenant, and he asked me why I was crying. We saw the same scene at the same moment. And my response, which was just a spontaneous response, was I said, I'm looking at my sister. That was irreversible. I could never go back. been 43 years. Stays with me. So, the policeman's my brother too. I have to understand where the soul is. But if I bash the policeman, he'll never find it. Now, I had to go through a lot of training and preparation and reflection and meditation to get further into this state of mind and spirit. And it's not for everybody, but I do feel like it's really important to delegitimize the violence, and we have to be willing to pay the price to delegitimize it. Or at least that's my philosophy. And it's better to do it with other people, in a group. It's a process. I mean, life, one of the themes of my book is life's a journey, not a destination. It's a constant journey that's unfolding, and you reflect, and you have experiences, and then you come back and reflect again and think, wow, it's been pretty intense. On the other hand, I think we always have a choice as to whether we're going to continue business as usual, which is violence against violence, in response to violence. That's business as usual. That's how we've been trained. Or we break that cycle. Am I willing to break the cycle? I don't know. We have a new project in Veterans for Peace called Veterans Peace Teams. They're just getting started. They're actually on their way to Chicago for the events at the NATO conference. They've all been trained in nonviolence, and they're trained to go when asked by the occupied people to stand between the police and the occupiers. And they're trained to take the blows. That's what they're trained to do. These are people who were once trained to kill, and they've gone through a transformation. Nobody knows ever what you're going to do when the test comes. You can only say, this is my intention, and this is my commitment, and this is my preparation, and this is my plan. But I could never tell anybody I know absolutely for sure what I'm going to do in every situation, but I do know what how I'm preparing myself to be. And I know it's very difficult. I saw this video last night of the young guy, this 37-year-old that was beaten Fullerton. It came out yesterday because of the trial of the police officers. It's an incredible video of 6 police officers brutally beating up a 37-year-old homeless guy. You saw it?
Calling out for his father.
This is just bestial behavior. And fortunately, that community is now responding, but so there's that man's life may have meaning because it's turned down the whole much of the community of Fullerton, and the two of the police officers charged with one was charged with murder today, but that happened a year ago. If that had happened to an African American, there would have been riots. That people saw how that man was being beaten by the police, but he was white. So I don't know where we are. Where are we in terms of our capacity to feel rage and then to channel the rage into some way that addresses the structural defects and pathologies of our system. But also, many of us have been raised in dysfunctional families, and we've been raised in dysfunctional villages. And we've all been raised in a dysfunctional culture. And so, one of Occupy's tasks, as it has been for some of us vets who have been trying to recover from our own dehumanization, is we have to create a new paradigm. We have to be the creators of the paradigm. The paradigm of, again, nourishing empathy. Realizing that cooperation is the only way we've survived all these millions of years is through cooperation. That is an indispensable survival mechanism. You have to cooperate, and mutual respect, and sense of fairness. Yes, we have the reptilian brain, but we also now have consciousness. And the question is, are we going to nourish it? And that's a lot of maybe work, but it's pretty important work. So I don't know. I think your question is fantastic, and I think that question will guide your process.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let me take another stack. You've been waiting? Okay.
Yes.
We'll put you first, Dan. Good luck, Dan.
I'm Mike Hernandez. I do have to say, before I ask my question, that I sort of disagree with what you said about, had that been an African American, there would have been riots. I look at what happened with Trayvon Martin, and the uprising that came from the black community and how they kept it peaceful, and I think that it shows the evolution that the black community has gone through. So I just wanted to say that real quick. My question to you is, I'm part of the PDX Bikes Forum. So we ride in solidarity with Occupy Portland and various other affinity groups during protests. And so we're sort of like the veterans group that you're speaking of. We sort of create a barrier between the police and the protesters. And my question is, how do you feel about us using our bicycles as a tool for the revolution?
Well, I think bicycling is revolutionary, first of all. I've hand cycled 60,000 miles in 14 years. I mean, it's my primary form of transportation. I think the wheel, and moving the wheel to move your weight, and the wheel is, a wheel has been around like 5,500 years, but only 100 years that we had this bicycle technology with ball bearings and pneumatic tires. I think it's one of the most sophisticated, appropriate technological inventions in the history of the world. And I think there's all kinds of ways to be using the bicycle, including being an intermediary between the protesters and the police. And I know that some of the bicyclists were knocked off their bicycles on May Day. Maybe all of you. I don't know how many there were. All of you were.
Lots of us.
Lots. And what happened to your bicycles?
That was part of our controversy when we released our press statement to Sam Adams. We saw it as a way for them to sort of take our bicycles out of the equation and say that, oh, I didn't see any bicycle there, because usually when something happens involving a bicycle, they'll confiscate the bikes as well. But in this case, they were leaving the bikes in the street.
Just taking you, knocking you down and putting you in the paddy wagon.
And so, luckily, we had been organizing and beforehand, and we helped each other out. We locked bikes up and things like that. Took pictures of whoever the bike belonged to so that we can get the bike back to them. So that was something that I don't think they were expecting, and I think that we did a really fine job on.
Well, they don't expect a lot of things, you know.
But yeah, we get a lot of flack from the bicycling community because we are sort of, you know, we're using our bikes in a different way. To me, it just makes sense. You know, all these gas and oil companies receive subsidies while posting record profits, and they're usually in you know, the majority of the top 10 every year. And to me, it only makes sense if you want to hurt the 1% that you ride a bicycle. Bicycle is protest.
I think bicycling is revolutionary, as I said. It's an act of like eating local food and riding your bicycles are both revolutionary acts. Now, a lot of the bicycling community is very bourgeois, as you know. Now, when I was cycling on my book tour from San Francisco to the Bay Area, it was a 750-mile bike trip. I was peddling my book from book talk to book talk. I wanted to get the cycling community in Marin County and Sonoma County to support my coming through those counties, and they had meetings to decide whether they could support my cycling through their counties. They couldn't agree on it. Because my message is too political to them. It's not a comfortable thing in their bicycling community. I was disappointed, but you know, it wasn't going to stop me from cycling through there. I thought they might know a better route, you know, to get through and save me a little agony on some of the highways. But so it's you know, it's the class division within the cycling community itself.
So I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for all your work through the years. But I also kind of wanted to follow up with a little bit of commentary about the homeless man who was beaten by those police. I wanted to add to that discussion that there's a startling probability, I feel, that if that person had been a member of the black community, we wouldn't have heard about it at all.
Yeah.
As it happens on a fairly regular basis. In regards to my actual question, I wanted to share with you a quote from Edward Abbey, sort of to give you the perspective that I'm coming from. He has an amazing quote, and I'm loosely paraphrasing, about how the industrial way of life has always led to the industrial way of death. And it's sort of like from Antietam to Dachau and from Shiloh to Stalingrad. The industrialization of civilizations has really only achieved the mass production of human corpses. So I was wondering if you could speak to the sort of reciprocal connection between capitalist exploitation and destruction of the environment and the ongoing system of dehumanization and murder, especially in its deadly focus on indigenous populations.
Well, I mean, capitalism itself, you couldn't design a more destructive economy, political economy than capitalism. It knows no limits, and a finite planet, finite is finite. So it needs to constantly expand and exploit both labor and nature, or the earth. And that's why the sooner we facilitate its collapse, the better off we all will be. I mean, collapse itself is a correction. Extinction's a correction too. But collapse is certainly a correction, and it's way long overdue. As I said earlier in my talk, all industrial civilization has been built on incredible, incomprehensible smashing of human beings and their land. All of the civilizations, we have maybe 30 civilizations in human history. They've all been built on a massive amount of exploitation and destruction and pain and suffering in order to build the pyramids, the irrigation system, starting in Sumer and Mesopotamia. And so, and of course, we were all indigenous once. We all came from, you know, we weren't all moderns always, you know, we were something more aboriginal thousands of years ago. And so, I just know, that's why I said that being a white male, Eurocentric male, has helped insulate me from those realities. I've had to really study, because I know from my Vietnam experience, I was a savage. How could that be? It's very easy. That's how civilization has functioned. It's savagery. They get young people like me believing in the state, being patriotic, believing in the flag. My whole identity gets wrapped up in being obedient to that. And then I discover I'm a murderer. Or I'm part of atrocities that dehumanize me. So, for me, I don't even know why that happened to me, but it happened. Because I was not even very curious about things. I was just going along. I was an officer. I was going to do my duty, get out and be a lawyer, make a lot of money. Sometimes I say the Great Spirit just wasn't going to let me slide through this life. And it's been a very meaningful life. So, I don't know if I am answering your question and responding to what you what do you want me to expound more? I mean, capitalism is just, by definition, it divides people between owners, managers, and workers. It divides people from Earth, because you have to exploit the Earth to make the money, to do the manufacturing. And it's just totally alienating to the soul. And I maintain you can't live without soul. You have to have the real deep meaning of life. And empathy is an archetype, I believe. We all have empathy, but we are not nourished to express the empathy, because in this society, for example, if you're feeling your empathy all the time, you're going to be saying, that's not right, that's unjust, this isn't. And so you're trained and conditioned to not honor your empathy because it gets in the way of being successful. And in my strange case with the Veterans Administration, I have a disability of post-traumatic stress disorder from my Vietnam experiences because, and this is written in my psychiatric report, that I can't, because I have a lot of advanced education, quote unquote advanced education, it's really, it dumbed me down really badly, but it's supposedly advanced education, that I can't apply my education because I can't adjust to this culture. I can't. It's a sick culture. Why would I want to adjust to sickness? I'm trying to get better. And so I get a disability for having been in war because I can't adjust to being a nice, good, money-making American. And I would submit that being a nice, money-making American is dehumanizing, and it's dysfunctional, it's pathological, it's sick. So that's why, again, I'm thrilled that there's a revolutionary process, I think, in Occupy all over the world, really, that people at some point do wake up. When conditions get so bad, you say, wait a minute, this is not, I'm not going to continue playing this game. This is a pretend society. Everything is pretend. It's been pretend from the beginning. It's all pretentious. It's not real. It's built on killing the Indians, taking their land, dispossession. We stole the Africans for their labor. So we stole the land, we stole the labor, and in the 20th century, we stole resources from all over the world to build our exceptional society. Outsourcing all the pain and suffering, so we don't feel it, we don't see it, and therefore it actually very much hurts our own development, because we get very spoiled thinking that our shit doesn't stink, and basically we're not humbled. We don't feel a lot of humility. I think even having artificial light all the time where we can't see the stars at night, not as clearly as I used to see them when I was growing up in farm country, looking at a night sky is very humbling. It's awesome. There's 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. I mean, it's just incredible. And I'm into permaculture gardening, and just watching things grow from little seeds. It's awesome. I don't want to be destroying it. And our life depends upon microbes. Our entire life depends upon the health of microbes in the soil. And we destroy them like nothing. It's no big deal. We bomb them. We poison them with chemicals. We dig them up to build our skyscrapers, but we can't live without those microbes. So part of the epistemological shift is going from thinking we're separate from nature, which started after the Ice Age 10,000 years ago, domesticating plants and animals. So we were, as humans, we're separating ourselves from nature, and therefore that's an epistemology that guides our thought structure and our values that we will exploit rather than integrate with. Now the epistemology shifts either, well, if we're going to survive, shifts to an eco-consciousness, knowing that we are nature. We are nature. Nature's not, the environment's not out there. We're the environment. We're part of the environment. It's not, we're not separate. And that would be a radical shift in the way we think, and therefore in the way we behave. And my mantra in the book is, we are not worth more, and they're not worth less. And that would be true for the microbes, and the Salvadorans, and people everywhere. But it's not the way I was raised.
Thank you very much, Dr. Willson, for sharing your experience.
Can you speak a little louder?
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. It's very encouraging. Occupy Wall Street, which I'm glad to hear you're so supportive of, has all kinds of various, I guess, ideologies or ideas about change. And it's very encouraging for me to hear that you're against imperialism and capitalism. I just wondered, what is the future that you envision? What are you
What's the future I envision? Well, part of the research I went into writing the book, was I wanted to understand the long view of the human journey, to understand my journey. This started in 1941. So I studied a lot of anthropology, archaeology, evolutionary biology, quantum physics, psychology, and so forth, to try to get a grasp of all these themes and dimensions and patterns that have come through history, of which I'm a part of. And now I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, so I kind of concluded, not uniquely, but from reading a lot of other people, that the only, in history, human history, the only real sustainable, durable social unit or model are small communities that are food sufficient. So maybe 100 to 300 people, and thousands of them, but you function in a community where people operate on familiarity and responsibility, and therefore accountability. And so what I talk about a lot is the Neolithic village, which the Zapatistas, by the way, are a living example of. I mean, they wouldn't call themselves Neolithic, but it's kind of like they're kind of recreating a Neolithic village where they're simple tool sufficient, and they're food sufficient, and they're fiber sufficient. And so whenever you have to go outside the carrying capacity of your watershed, say, for example, in a bioregional model, you're going to be imperial. Because if you have to take things from other people outside your sustainable region, which we could define as a bioregion as defined by watersheds. How many of each species can live in that watershed and be in harmony with the earth and with the nature and each other. So I would say that I'm interested in at least promoting as an idea that we want thousands of small food-sufficient communities. Even in Portland, we could have hundreds of them. So that we move our need for dependence upon external inputs coming from the system, or from electricity, or from transportation outside our area. So that's what I say. That's the model I like to. And also another example would have been what happened in Spain in 1935, 36, 37. They were kind of wiped out during the Civil War by Franco. But there was an amazing number of decentralized communities in the Basque region of Spain. And whenever I go to Chiapas, there's always people from the Basque region of Spain visiting. Very interesting. They really kind of know their historical and philosophical connections. And also the landless movement in Brazil, they are interacting lots with the Zapatistas also. And there's probably some of you know about the landless movement in Brazil, because there's a landless movement in this country now patterned after the landless movement in Brazil.
Should we take another stack? How's the energy of the room? Do we want to keep going? Still have energy?
Yeah.
I think later we'll take some time for book signing. If you brought a book you want to have signed, but we have energy. We can keep going. It's now what, 8:30?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So how about another stack of 3? I know you've been waiting, so you'll go first. Anybody else? Stephanie.
There.
Okay. So that's 3. Go ahead.
Can power in this country, specifically the United States, whether it's capitalism or whatever the power is, can it be challenged without a strong anti-war movement as its principal driving force? Can you possibly challenge power without understanding what war is doing right now? I think that's your topic, but specifically, how do you appraise the energy in the anti-war movement regarding the United States today?
Well, I've been very, of course, disheartened about the anti-war movement because one of the problems is that we're still consuming at such an incredible level as in our lifestyles. The cumulative consumption of our lifestyles requires wars. That's the structural disconnect. And so one of the revolutionary tenets, I would say, is radical downsizing or radical simplification of our lives in small communities. So that actually, I kind of hesitate to go to anti-war gatherings using fossil fuels. Because by so doing, I am perpetuating the war. In fact, at the Veterans for Peace Convention that happened in Seattle in 2006, I and about a dozen others cycled from Eugene, Oregon to Seattle simply because we didn't want to go to an anti-war convention, flying or driving using fossil fuels. And some people said, oh, you're not going to do that. And we said, yeah, we're going to do it. And it was a fantastic experience, of course, because it's, to me, moving slowly at 12 or 14 miles an hour is kind of my style. And so it's a way I'm engaged in the journey. I'm really observing what's happening. It's at the pace that I like. But I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that the anti-war movement needs to have a much broader vision. That realizing that war is an indispensable necessity to maintain the U.S. society. There's no way around it. And therefore, part of our revolutionary process is not just to obstruct business as usual, and not just to non-cooperate, but is to reconstruct local communities that are relatively independent of outside inputs. That's what I would call bioregionalism. Now, that just at least it gives people an idea that there is an alternative, the nation-state. Nation-states have only been around 300 years. They are a creation of human beings. And they're very dysfunctional. Therefore, they're not going to continue. Whether we participate in trying to make them obsolete or not, they won't survive because they're not sustainable, because they actually require resources that come from outside their territory, which is an imperial policy, and that leads to wars. All empires have faced this.
So Stephanie?
Oh, I was just going to back with the fellow who said something about dialectical thinking, because I don't know anything about it and I want to, and you mentioned industrialization. It made me think, turn the
Swords into plowshares.
Turn the swords into the plowshares, that this is to keep our minds open. That's why I like Occupy, because everyone's creative, so. But you've read a lot, so I know you're right, but.
No,
it
I'm
seems like you-
I'm still learning. Believe me, I'm still learning. I'm still reading, but I'm still learning. I'm still getting up in the morning. It's a new day. You know, think, wow, what am I going to learn today?
And in our generation, we kind of have our memes are sort of set. We don't really have all the new memes just flying out, so there could be a lot. Industrialization, low energy, maybe there could still be wireless from New York to Tokyo, and still industrial, but we're nice to each other. I don't know.
There was a question over here.
It sounds like, my name's Lauren Paulson, it sounds like you're viewing Occupy with some optimism. What groups over the last couple of decades that you've observed had hope and went wrong, and if so, what happened to them, and what groups went right, and what was their success founded on?
Well, I don't call myself an optimist or a pessimist, actually, but I am encouraged by Occupy for sure. But I haven't been part of any groups that really address the issue of class. And class is lethal. We cannot have a new society unless we address class, which means we have to address states of mind, addictions, because we're addicted to a way of life, and what we call the left, so to speak, and I don't think those terms are very appropriate either. Really, many people that have been in the left are still pretty comfortable, including myself, actually. I'm not comfortable emotionally or psychologically, but you know, I could say physically I'm relatively comfortable. But so I've been, you know, we had the Central American Solidarity Movement. We might have stopped an invasion of Nicaragua, an outright invasion of Nicaragua, maybe. We had the Sanctuary Movement, you know, that was bringing people from, especially from El Salvador to Canada. And we've had a pretty incredible anti-nuclear movement. And I was in the first groups of affinity groups in New England in dealing with the clamshell, with the nuclear power plant in New Hampshire. It was a clamshell alliance. And by the way, those affinity groups, we never could function in affinity groups with consensus with more than about 15 people. And that was a fairly important thing to note, that size itself is a factor that enables consensus to work or not work smoothly. And I'm kind of shy, so when I'm in a large group, I tend I feel sometimes I'm not going to participate. I just don't think that there's been any effort, any organized effort. And remember, the Occupy was spontaneous. It was a ripe moment in history, and it happened. And it happened because of the incredible corruption and the disconnect in the society that wasn't being addressed by the political system at all. And the political system's not going to address it. The political system's unable to address it because the political system is owned by the money. So I don't know that I can say right or wrong or how they went wrong. I just think we haven't had the holistic view, the structural understanding of capitalism and our lifestyle connection to perpetuating the problem. And I think many of us are caught up in this complicity because we're addicted to a way of life that requires imperial policies to maintain. That's a struggle I had also, myself. And but nonetheless, I'm inspired and motivated and enthused by what I see a lot of the young people doing in Occupy and how they're working on the concepts of vertical versus horizontal, general assemblies, consensus, just just that they're experimenting with ways to actually create a new paradigm. They have to be the change they want to see, which is what Gandhi said. You have to be the change you want to see. You have to experiment. You have to practice it. You have to be willing to be humbled, because there's going to be things that happen and say, oh shit, that didn't work, or whatever, you know. But that's part of the process of learning. That's a part of the process of the experiment of life.
How about one more stack, and then we'll call it Antonio first. This gentleman in the black sweater. Can't see what it is. No? There's room for one more?
There's one more.
Okay. Okay, sure. Okay, so Antonio?
Yeah. Have you seen Ungrid by chance? The documentary? Ungrid.
On drift?
Ungrid.
On grip?
Yeah, you're in it. You're like in the first intro, like 2 minutes. It's really, I like what you said.
Because I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I'll write it down. You can check it out.
On GRIP?
UNGRIP.
Ungrid.
Yeah, I'll play it next Wednesday.
Okay.
5:30 here. You'll be in it. You're in the army. Yeah, see yourself.
Okay, and then there was a second question.
Yeah, I'm Mike Hastings, good friend of Brian's.
Mike was a medic in Vietnam.
And Brian often says, and I believe it, and based on my experience with his.
Speak up.
Brian often says, as I do, that the issues are in the tissues, you know, and when Brian wrote his first book, On Third World Legs, he was talking about going into that village and looking down and seeing the Vietnamese woman dead with 3 children in her arms, and he looked down and he said, in that moment, and it only took a second, I got it. That was Brian Willson speaking, and that certainly was true for me when I was in Vietnam, that I realized the most profound experience I had in Vietnam when I came back. I realized that I was the enemy. I was the enemy. Okay, I was on. My unit was made up of a reconnaissance support base and 3 fire bases. Those 3 fire bases had 155 millimeter howitzers, and they fired into free fire zones, and they killed God only knows how many people. And I think that in order for this to work, people are going to have to get involved. There's a lot of people on the left that know what's going on, but they don't put their feet on the street. Only thing I can say is that I wish that and hope that all of us, and I think most people in this room probably do that. They probably put their feet on the street. But I know a lot of people on the left that have great intellectual conversations at Starbucks, but they don't put their feet on the street. It's like in my family, I'm known as the peace activist, and isn't it wonderful that they don't have to do that? So that's why I'm saying if you're going to stop the madness, you know, I mean, I've seen dead people. I've had a guy's head in my lap with a bullet wound in his head, or I've had taken dead people off of helicopters. All that stuff. And once you see it and you smell it and you touch it, it becomes real to you, you know. And we simply have to do something and get out in the street, because this government continues to kill innocent people.
Everywhere.
So, that's all I can say is please get involved, whatever it is, on whatever level, because the free lunches are over. They're over. They really are. If you want to, I'm 67. Most of my 80% of my life's over. But I just think that, and that's one thing I'm really enthusiastic about the Occupy movement. That's probably the best thing that I've experienced, and that I can remember. Because I feel like that there's really something going now because for so many years it was always the same people at the demonstrations. I mean, my story is no different than anybody else. I've been thrown down by the police. I've been arrested, pepper sprayed, tear gas. I've had concussion grenades thrown at me. I've had high frequency cannons aimed at me. All that stuff. And if you want to have a safe world for your children or your grandchildren, you might have to get thrown down by the police. You might have to get pepper sprayed. You might have to get tear gassed. That may be the price. So, thanks.
Mike's going to the Chicago for the NATO conference with his camera.
Okay, and there was a third question from the bravest lady in Occupy.
Thank you, Brian. The people here inspire me. You inspire me to think. And I have to look at the world I thought was so uncomfortable. I really didn't know that I was so comfortable. But I'm happy to think today. Thank you for each one who keeps occupying and making us stronger together. Thank you.
Future's in our hands.